The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Wednesday, January 3rd, 2018. Bear with me while I adjust this microphone. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, I'd like to begin the show by thanking our patrons, without whom this is not possible. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron today. There's a lot happening in the news that is, a lot of it is just breaking this morning. The story of Steve Bannon turning coat on Donald Trump. I want to break into that a little bit throughout today's show. And also some tweets that I missed while I was in a comatose state last night, getting, I think I got almost 12 hours of sleep last night, making up for lost time. But while I was sleeping, the President of the United States decided to provoke the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, with a ridiculous tweet that we have to discuss. He's the President of the United States, so statements like this can't be easily dismissed as merely being distractions, right? So we'll discuss that. And then some news on DACA and the essentially what amounts to being taking dreamers hostage in exchange for getting funding for the wall that Donald Trump said he was going to make Mexico pay for. So we'll cover all that and more. We'll be reading your comments in the comment sections. And if I can get my phones up and running, we'll talk to you live, 857-600-0518. Let's start with the tweet from yesterday. President Trump took to Twitter last night, or yesterday afternoon, rather, and this is what he had to say. He said, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from this depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I, too, have a nuclear button, but it is much bigger and and more powerful than one of his, than his, and my button works. Okay. Again, so there's always a course of contrarians who immediately jump and say, why are we paying attention to his tweets? My friends, this is the President of the United States directly talking to a leader of a nuclear armed state, and whether or not they have a massive nuclear arsenal is irrelevant. They do have nuclear capabilities. And he's taunting him. I think I was using the word provoke, but the president is taunting this man. And this is significant in so much as it is destabilizing. And it has the potential of making a volatile situation even worse. If you can imagine a nuclear, quote unquote, standoff. We're not really at a standoff so much as we are an impasse with their nuclear proliferation. But if you can imagine making that situation worse, Donald Trump has done everything in his ability to make it worse. And so we have to discuss it. That's first and foremost. Then, two, if we look at it strategically, I think we should pause and consider it strategically, because nothing's worked in the past with North Korea's nuclear program, and I can hear my leftist friends in my ear. It's like it's just in my ear all day long. Well, they have the right to get nuclear weapons. Okay, fine, they do. But you can't go down that track without undermining other leftist positions. So let's put that aside. Let's put aside the fact that they are a sovereign nation, and they do have the right to pursue nuclear weapons, right? But the pursuit of nuclear weapons is a destabilizing action in and of itself. Possession of nuclear weapons can be extremely destabilizing, which is why you see India and Pakistan, they quickly got nuclear weapons one after the other, because neither state was going to allow the other to have a strategic advantage. And so this creates a problem for South Korea. Now, on the backdrop of all this, North Korea and South Korea yesterday announced that they are going to reopen their hotline, essentially their ability to talk directly and to stave off disaster. This is something that they cut off in previous months, and now this is something that they're trying to reestablish, which is a move in the positive direction. In a sense, it seems like it's minor, but it's very significant. But in the backdrop of all this, the president of the United States takes to Twitter and makes a volatile situation worse. So if we're looking at it just simply from a media perspective, people are tired of us covering Donald Trump's tweets. But I think it's relevant in so much as if you consider every word from the president carries significance. It is significant. So you can't just dismiss it away as a media perspective and say, oh, well, he's distracting from X, Y, and Z. No, he's not. He's not distracting. He's creating a greater problem. All right, so that's number one. Now, strategically, I was thinking about this as I was driving in this morning, and I'm wondering if Donald Trump's recklessness can actually produce different results in the positive column, right? I have to say it like that because I don't want to just say positive results because I'm not sure that it would just directly yield positive results. But his destabilizing recklessness is a completely different approach to foreign policy than we've seen any other president in almost our lifetime or hell, in the history of the United States for that matter. And you wonder, like, if perhaps this is just something uniquely different. Kim Jong-un might like this. Not that Kim Jong-un is the end-all to be-all in terms of our foreign policy, but he definitely represents a direct threat to our foreign interests. I'm just curious to see if this will play out in any other fashion than all-out nuclear war. And I'm reminded of a guest that I had on the show saying that, with the potentiality of Donald Trump leading us to the potential, rather, of Donald Trump leading us to nuclear war, or the percentage chance of us going into nuclear war because Donald Trump is president has increased. Right. And I think that's fair to say. And so is the risk worth the reward? Is Donald Trump's recklessness worth any potential award for a potential positive outcome in a situation that's essentially been a stalemate? All that to say is I just have to pause and wonder if this technique could work. This is not a positive glance on Donald Trump. I don't have to, speak favorably of him to actually analyze what he's doing. Could his reckless cowboy behavior, particularly in North Korea, and I want to absolutely depart from him when it comes to Iran. And I want to share a tweet that he was speaking about Iran this morning that completely, I think, is reckless and dangerous. But with regard to North Korea, I mean, maybe it takes a crazy person to connect with another crazy person. Maybe they're kindred spirits, Donald Trump and I don't know. It's possible, right? And I hear the audience laughing. But I had to consider that as I drove in, and I wonder, we really won't know. The risk is extremely high. The potential outcome is devastating to humanity as we know it. But at this point, we'll have to see. That's all I can say. I mean, honestly, it's a risk. And I think this is where you get the stalemates that we've had so many times before, where we do the cat and mouse game with North Korea. Bill Clinton initially had a deal with Kim Jong-un's father, and then his father, Kim Jong-il, I believe, reneged on that deal. Barack Obama pretty much was quiet, didn't make a lot of overtures to them or against them. George W. Bush, likewise, tried to pull away from the deal. Each administration prior to this found themselves in a stalemate with North Korea because they carried the standard United States foreign policy approach. And to say the least, if you look at this tweet from the president, if you look at his behavior and his attitude towards Kim Jong-un, you can 100% say that this is absolute opposite of what any previous administration would have ever done. Now, I understand it's walking a fine line between nuclear holocaust and a possible outcome that may be different, that may be favorable. I don't know. But what I do know is that his words, the words of the president, have significant weight. And even when he's acting like a schoolyard bully, the words of the president carry significant weight. And I actually want to segue over from North Korea to a tweet that he just sent out this morning regarding Iran. And this is what he had to say this morning with regard to Iran, if this one would come up. Such respect for the people of Iran as they try to take back their corrupt government. You will see great support from the United States at the appropriate time. Now, this bothers me. This tweet potentially bothers me more than the nuclear threat tweet. And here's why. The threshold for us to get into a nuclear conflict with North Korea is extremely high and very unlikely. We are closer simply because Donald Trump is a moron. We are. But the threshold for U.S. intervention is pretty low. We have a long track record in administration after administration after administration intervening in the domestic politics of a foreign nation and making bad situations worse. So when I pull this up and I think about Trump, such respect of his words, and this is what he says, such respect for the people of Iran as they try to take back their corrupt government. You will see great support from the United States. I'm sorry, I have to pause and say, exactly what do you mean? Great support from the United States, because when we've seen great support from the United States in previous interventions, we've made terrible situations even worse. Take a look at Libya. Take a look at Syria. Take a look at everywhere we have an American footprint. We have made bad situations worse. So the president saying this morning, first of all, let's make it clear. The president is not on the side of the Iranian people. The president is on the side of destabilizing the regime and undermining the regime. Now, as I said yesterday, if the people so choose to overthrow the bonds of their government and they want a different form of government and the majority of the people want that, then that's something that they should, that's their prerogative. As free people, that's what they should be able to do. However, the president is not interested in not the least bit concerned about the people of Iran in so much as he's interested in two things: destroying the nuclear agreement. That's first and foremost. And then if he can overthrow that regime, he absolutely would. And the problem with that tweet from this morning is that it represents a broad range of foreign policy actions that the United States can take, that the president can take based on his own prerogative, based on precedent set by George W. Bush, by Barack Obama. They have such leeway to go into these regions without any type of approval from authorization of use of military force, AUMF, from Congress. He has such latitude to be able just a range of options of actually putting troops there, of sending funding to fund, there are no quote unquote rebels at this point, but let's say a rebellion actually organizes. The president has tremendous ability to get involved in that manner. And considering the goals of neoconservatives in the United States of America, of which Donald Trump is a neoconservative, I hope we've dispelled with that notion that the president is a non-interventionist and that the president is anti-war, which was a line of lies that was peddled by quite a few people. Let me choose my words. I want to be precise. By a handful of progressive commentators, so-called progressive commentators with large audiences, were pushing this idea that Trump would be the anti-war president as compared to Hillary Clinton. I hope that we've dispelled with that notion at this point that Donald Trump is as much a neoconservative as Dick Cheney, even if it's only to the extent that he has advisors around him that he just does whatever the hell those advisors say. I firmly believe that the president of the United States has no idea what he's doing. He's genuinely just doing whatever is being put on his desk. What's being put on his desk is a combination of Republican neoliberal economic policies and Republican neoconservative foreign policies. And this is what is represented in this tweet, potentially, unless he's talking about diplomatic relationships, which I seriously doubt the president is speaking of that. I can guarantee you that the president is speaking of finding a way to foment a full-blown rebellion in Iran and to fund it and to send advisors from the United States to Iran, not for the purposes of creating a democracy that would represent the will of the people, but to undermine the regime that's currently there, no matter the outcome of what happens next. And this isn't to defend the regime. Quite a few people who fled Iran after the 1979 revolution. You know, there's quite a few human rights violations that can be laid at the feet of Iran. This is in no form or fashion a defense of the Iranian revolution, right? This is 100% to say that every time the United States gets involved, we screw it up and we make a terrible situation that much worse. Let's read a couple of comments in the different chat rooms on YouTube. Valerie says, I think it's like the old adage, two wrongs, I am Kim Jong-un and Trump don't make it right. And then we have two morons in power, in charge of a nuclear arsenal. And to be fair, the United States, we have a nuclear arsenal. North Korea has a nuclear weapon. Now they're quickly doing everything they can to get to a nuclear arsenal. But it is a very dangerous, volatile situation, and the president of the United States is definitely make it worse. All right. In other news, this next story is actually fascinating, and I'm not sure that I understand it yet. It's the story of Steve Bannon and Steve Bannon turning on Donald Trump. And the reason I don't understand it yet is because, one, it just came out this morning. Two, Steve Bannon seemed to have Donald Trump's back across the board. And in fact, it seemed as though he was going to use. Now, he did, in fairness, he did give a caveat, a scenario underneath which he would turn on Donald Trump. And I'm trying to recall that at this moment. I can't recall exactly what those conditions were, but I'm sure it's something along the lines of, is the president being true to what got him into the White House in the first place? I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And now there's a book that's coming out called Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. And Steve Bannon is quoted heavily in this book. And he's speaking specifically of the meeting that happened, I believe, in June at Trump Tower with the Russian lawyer by the name of Veselnitskaya, I believe is her last name. And he described that meeting as treasonous and unpatriotic. And then he went on to say in the book that Don Jr., Natalia Veselnitskaya is actually her full name, that Don Jr. is going to be cracked on live television. So I want to read a paragraph here from theguardian.com, who got access to the book. They said in regard to Steve Bannon is particularly scathing of a June 2016 meeting involving Trump's son, Donald Jr., son-in-law Jared Kushner, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya at Trump Tower in New York. A trusted intermediary had promised documents that would incriminate rival Hillary Clinton. We've covered this pretty extensively. But instead of alerting the FBI to a potential assault on American democracy by a foreign power, Trump Jr. replied in an email, "I love it." Now, this is all known. We cover the email leaks that Don Jr. released his own emails outlining how this meeting came about. He thought it would... Junior, not being the bright one in the bunch, thought that it would exonerate him, but it actually was rather incriminating. So here's a little bit more from The Guardian. They said, quote, "The meeting was revealed by the New York Times in July, blah, blah, blah." Bannon remarked mockingly, The three senior guys in the campaign thought it was a good idea to meet with a foreign government inside Trump Tower in the conference room on the 25th floor with no lawyers. They didn't have any lawyers. He said, even if you thought that this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad shit, I happen to think it's all of that. You should have called the FBI immediately. Bannon went on, and this is Bannon speaking to the author of the book, and the author of the book wrote this: to say that if any such meeting had taken place, it should have been set up at, quote, in a Holiday Inn in Manchester, New Hampshire, with your lawyers who meet with these people. Any information, he said, could then be dumped down to Breitbart or something like that, or maybe something, blah, 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 some other legitimate publication. You never see it. You never know it because you don't need, but that's the brain trust that they had. Whatever he's talking about at the end. This is fascinating, right? So it's fascinating in the sense that the only, besides Fox News, the only media outlet that has, of any significance, right? You have blogs and stuff. But the only media outlet that has been 100% pro-Trump and had his back the entire time has been Breitbart.com. Steve Bannon, of course, is the leader, the editor-in-chief. I don't know his exact title, but he's essentially the leader of Breitbart, and he determines the direction. To see him turn like this, and perhaps he was just running his mouth. He probably was just speaking what he thought. He's thought all along. But to say it at this point, at the height of the Mueller investigation, really creates a problem for the Trump administration, to say the least, right? That goes without saying. But the question is now, how does the president respond to this? Because, you know, as we speak, he's probably composing a tweet, getting ready to respond to the allegations from, or the insinuations from Steve Bannon, who was his ace boon coon at one time. I'm still curious as to the why. At first, I thought that this was a book that Steve Bannon was putting out. I'm like, oh, so Steve is trying to make some money. But it's not. It's actually a different author, another author who was just merely interviewing Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon said all of this, which really undercuts the entire, this entire veil of protection that's been around the inner circle of the Trump team and the Trump family and those loyalists who have insisted that they did nothing wrong under any circumstances. There's nothing to see here. There was no collusion. There was no, you know, there was no undermining of the American democracy. You know, we didn't even know the Russians. Something along those lines has been the talking point the entire time. And now someone as close as and as intricate as involved in the Trump administration and the Trump campaign as Steve Bannon. I mean, he is like Trump's boy, now turning coat and saying that this is something that he believed was unpatriotic and something that was treasonous. I mean, treasonous. I almost let that slide, right? I almost went right past it and lumped it in with unpatriotic. But to say that it's treasonous falls into the category of high crimes and misdemeanors, which falls into the category of impeachable offenses. Now, the thing is that how much of this can actually be laid at the feet of the president versus how much of this is just going to take down Jared Kushner. Paul Manafort is already under indictment, and what will take down Don Jr., which probably is I think this through, the only person in that group between Kushner and Jr. who would turn on Trump, between Kushner Jr. and Manafort, who would turn on Trump versus fall on their sword for daddy, would be Paul Manafort, who's already under indictment. So this is going to be some fascinating, a fascinating month as we see how the president responds to this. First and foremost, how is the president going to respond to this? And then two, how this actually impacts the national discourse at large. I don't think it's going to impact the investigation at all, because Mueller is probably aware of all this already. But I do think that this is going to put a damper on the conservative. Here's the other thing it's going to do, which I'm not even going to finish the last sentence. The other thing that's going to do is going to fuel the liberal onslaught of Russia paranoia. there's the Russia investigation, which is happening, should happen, and let it run its course. But then you go one step further into the Russia paranoia, and that's going to be a very negative side effect of this information, which the information should enhance the investigation, right? The Mueller investigation. But we all know, I mean, everybody is a Russian spy at this point. Hell, me saying what I just said I'm going to be lumped into Russian spies. Everybody is tied to Russia. If you didn't support Hillary Clinton with your whole heart and mind, you're going to be labeled as a Russian spy. So that is the negative effect of this. And we'll see. As far as the motivations of Steve Bannon, I still have no idea what motivated him. Perhaps, I mean, Steve Bannon is a vindictive, bitter, spiteful curmudgeon. So it could simply be he's waited this long to get back at President Trump for creating or allowing the situation for him to be removed. You know, everybody says that he resigned. No. Ultimately, he was forced out by the new chief of staff. And so this could be just the long game. He planned on doing this the entire time. If Bannon did think the meeting was treasonous, he sure sat on that feeling for a long time. Maybe Bannon has found a new favorite boy in Paul Ryan for 2020, or perhaps even Pence. This is Valerie in the chat room. Ron Finkley said, Trump is the biggest non-thinker. Just a let it flow president with regard to the tweets. Yeah, I mean, with regard to everything he says is just, you know, he doesn't process it and he just lets it flow. I actually like what Valerie said in the chat room, that, you know, perhaps Steve Bannon. See, people actually mistook Steve Bannon for being a genuine alt-right culture war warrior. Ultimately, and the reason I think I agree with the chat room, with Valerie in the chat room, is that I think Steve Bannon is much like any other Republican that you would have countered, which is give us tax breaks. You know, cut the budget. You know, cut funding for SNAP, cut funding for CHIP, cut funding for everything else so that you could find a way to give us tax breaks. I think ultimately it boils down to that. Steve Bannon, of course, the culture war issues were important to him, blah, blah, blah. But underneath all of that, look at his boy, look at Donald Trump. Underneath all of that, the number one thing that they wanted was to get these tax breaks. And he got that. But it wasn't Trump who gave it to him. Ultimately, it was Paul Ryan who gave it to him. So I think that might actually be a reasonable guess here, and then, you know, an informed guess that this simply could be that he sees Trump as a sinking ship. And so he could actually contribute to that ship sinking even quicker and even further. And he still gets what he needs from the Republican establishment. All this talk of being anti-establishment was hilarious to me at best, because they were the establishment. Of course, they beat out Jeb. Of course, they beat out Jeb Bush. They were only anti-establishment during the primaries. As soon as they won, Reince Priebus made sure that the Republican National Committee, the RNC, conformed to the Trump administration, to the Trump team at the time. So this idea that they were anti-establishment, you're only anti-establishment until the point that you get in power. And once Donald Trump won the primaries, he became establishment. And the Republican Party conformed to him. The Republican Party became Trump. And so everything that they talked about, Steve Bannon, who were anti-establishment, you know, we're going to attack, you know, Mitch McConnell, et cetera, that's fine and good. But ultimately, once they got in power, they found that it was useful to utilize them on key issues, namely these tax breaks. So if he could get what he needs for his agenda out of the establishment, which is now conforming to the Trump administration, then of course he has no need to stand by someone that perhaps he has knowledge of, or he believes was treasonous. At least Don Jr. and Vest in the Sky was there. Don Jr., Manafort, and Kushner. That's actually a pretty reasonable estimation. I think that might be one of the best ways to understand that until we get more information. All All right, let's take, and actually I'm going to pull up the chat room on Twitter as well as the chat room on Facebook because we want to get everyone involved. Leave your comments in the comment section and we'll weigh in on the discussion. Thanks for joining us in the morning. We have some pretty good numbers here. Definitely appreciate everyone who's making this shift with us. Tell me how you like it. If you like the morning show, and we'll keep doing it because, because we're here, but still. All right, 857-600-0518. Let's make a move on to the next story. One of the things that is heartbreaking is when you see the lives of real people being held hostage as political tools, political tokens, political chips to be gambled with. And Kellyanne Conway, who's still tangentially tied to the White House, went on Fox News and said that there's no, and this has pretty much been the position for a while, but it just hit me this morning, the extent to which the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans, I'm going to call them Americans because this is where they've grown up, this is where they went to school, this is where they've lived, this is where they work jobs, this is where they pay taxes, this is where some of them served in the military. Hundreds of thousands of young Americans who came here, their parents brought them here, and they've been undocumented, they can't become citizens, or they have to have a path to, however you want to describe them, the dreamers. Their lives are now being held hostage in order to get funding for the Mexican wall, the border wall. The wall that Donald Trump said was going to be paid for by Mexico. We all knew that it wasn't going to be paid for by Mexico. This isn't surprising. This isn't breaking news. But if you just think about how callous of a human being you have to be to willingly use, to look at these people as poker chips, right? That you don't really care about their conditions whatsoever. But you're going to use them as collateral, saying if you want to do anything to help these children, these young adults, then you're going to have to find funding for the wall. Now, here's the thing about it. They have the numbers that they need in Congress to do whatever they want to do, unless it has to be tied to reconciliation, which I think we're already outside of that window. No, we are outside of that window. So I'm not really sure why this is being presented as a bargaining chip, except to say that it just continues this crazed, deranged obsession with the other. I'm not even going to say Mexicans or foreigners, because the otherification actually transcends even nationality. You could be an American citizen. We've seen time and time again American citizens who are spoken to and treated as other simply because they aren't white conservative Christians. And this play by the Trump administration that's brought to my attention by Kellyanne Conway's interview this morning is really just another day in complete dehumanization of an entire segment of our society. And this is not shocking nor breaking news, but what it is just a really salient reminder that people who cry and make their entire political participation based off of being pro-life, and they make their entire political participation based off of family values, and they base their entire political participation based off of morality, have absolutely no problem dehumanizing an entire segment of our society and using them like they're damn poker chips. Think about this, right? This actually this goes beyond the dreamers. right? They do the same thing with everyone. They don't view any of us as useful as humans. They view us rather as useful tokens and useful fodder and just coins that they can use to get their political agenda across. And yet these are the people who are, I mean, think about the CHIP program, Children's Health Insurance Program, which still doesn't have funding, which means 9 million children across the United States will potentially lose their health care, are in the process, they are in the process of losing their health care. And yet the people who are so concerned with doing away with abortions, they are the cause of this. The people who are so concerned with a child before they're born have zero concern. And actually, not only is it that they don't care about you after you're born, they're willing to use you as a political bargaining chip. Senior citizens, what they're getting ready to do with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, but particularly Medicare, what they're getting ready to do there, in this category, they're not even bargaining chips. They don't even care. They're not saying do X or else we're going to cut Medicare. They're saying, Paul Ryan is expressly saying, we're going to cut Medicare. Just pause and think about this. These are the conversations that we have to have with people who on a daily basis swear that their political participation is based on moral values, that their political participation is based on, some contrived notion of Christianity, right? All of this, but you simply do not care about your brother or your sister. And God forbid, you don't care about the non-gender conforming community. So this blows me. It blows me away in so much as it's a daily reminder that lives genuinely do not matter to this group, except to the extent that they can use us to get what they want. And in this case, no DACA without funding for the wall. And that's just today. What do we have to give up in order for us to get CHIP? What do we have to give up in order for us to get funding for children's health care? What's the negotiating tool? Orrin Hatch, who's stepped down or is stepping down from his Senate seat for the state of Utah, prided himself on being one of the leaders who brought CHIP in a bipartisan fashion back with Kennedy, Ted Kennedy. They worked together and created the CHIP program. And Orrin Hatch was was on the floor debating with Sherrod Brown, and we played that clip for you where Orrin Hatch was like, "Well, one of the reasons we don't have any more money, we can't afford CHIP anymore because we don't have any more money." Meanwhile, they're cutting taxes and creating a $1.5 trillion addition to the deficit, but they can't afford the few billions that are necessary to maintain the CHIP program. Right? So he's stepping down, and it just shows you that all of the place that we've come from and the place that it's led to is a place that I can't say that politicians in America have always been, right? We're in a hyper-partisan era in America. We're so hyper-partisan where they do not care about their own programs. They do not care about their own programs. They only care to the extent that they can get a win for their donors. First and foremost, they can get a win for their bottom line, their personal economy. They can get a financial fiscal win for themselves, but then also can they get a win for their team, which is more important than anything else to them, getting those tax breaks for themselves and getting a quote unquote win for their team. And these are the people the reason I keep reiterating this is because at some point in this journey of American politics, we should be able to break free from this notion that conservatives represent morality in America. right? That conservative evangelical Christians participating in the Republican Party represent the epitome of moral participation in American politics. We have to be able to break away from that because it's right here in front of our eyes. Human life means nothing to them, only to the abortions mean nothing to the Republican Party, only to the extent that they can use it to galvanize the vote. Because if it really mattered to them, then they would address the issues for which women and families and couples who make those difficult decisions, they would address the issues for which they have to make those decisions, which overwhelmingly is an economic issue for so many. But we have to, going back to the main point is if we don't find a way to break loose this notion, this pervasive idea that morality in the United States is represented by Christian evangelicals and Christian evangelicals who participate in the Republican Party, particularly, then we'll forever have people who can go on television and say, dreamers, you can't stay in America unless Congress gives us funding for the wall. Children, 9 million children who need health insurance. You don't get health insurance unless we get X, Y, and Z. And first and foremost, you're not going to get that because the most important thing, you do understand the reason we lost funding for CHIP was because they were focused like a laser on repealing Obamacare. And then they ran out of time. They simply ran out of time to renew the funding on CHIP. Right. So that's the reason. But have you noticed that they haven't done anything whatsoever to actually fix the problem that they created? Nothing. And so now 9 million children, some of your children, some of the people listening to me have children who need this program. I know quite a few people whose children are on this program, and 9 million of them are going to lose coverage. There's already, I believe, Delaware, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be mistaken, going off the top of my head, but there's like a rolling process of funding. State by state by state, they're losing funding for childcare for children of poor families. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It only matters to the extent. That people, human beings, real individuals with real lives. See, it's this dehumanization process is so effective, right? And, you know, we are already desensitized to other nations, right? This is how we can, particularly non-Western nations or particularly non-European nations specifically, we are desensitized to seeing massacres over there. You know, we'll cry for France, but we won't cry for 200 students that were killed in Nigeria because we've dehumanized them. And that's kind of how it's been probably through the entire existence of the United States. It's hard to have empathy for people who are, one, far away, but then two, don't look like the majority, three, have a different religion. But now we've moved that dehumanization process here to the United States where we really don't have any empathy, hell, for each other across the board. I mean, mass shootings happen every single week, and we don't even care anymore. But now it's going one step further. Not only do we not care about people who have been killed in these streets because of gun violence, we don't even care about the children, right? We don't even think about them. It's not even an afterthought. The 9 million real children, cute ass little babies running around here, rosy cheeks, beautiful little things. We don't even care that they are losing their health care, only to the extent that we can get a political gain from it. And now, of course, if we don't care about the children, what makes you think we care about the dreamers? Because they are they're perfectly in the position to be otherified, if I can make that word up. Like they don't belong here. They're not one of us. They're not part of our civilization. So sure, it means nothing. It means nothing to reduce them down to just the name of the bill that would protect them, DACA. And yet, those are the people who represent. Let's see. morality in the United States. Let's see if this works. I'm not sure if I can get this to work. Caller, I think you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question? Nope, it's not working. All right, so let's take some more comments out of the comment section here. Mr. Democracy says that if they are Christian, they obviously have a moral distinction. But if they are liberals like Doug Jones, they are despicable baby killer socialists. Exactly. Exactly. He was saying it with sarcasm, obviously. But I mean, that's that's the difference here, right? You know, for those of us who dare allow a woman to choose, we represent the bottom of morality for an entire swath of the voting electorate, which matters, right? It absolutely matters because these are the people who are out here voting in these streets. And to the entire swath of them, the very notion of allowing a woman to choose whether or not she's going to go to full term with a pregnancy represents a complete bereftness of morality. Like, you are the scum of the earth. You are a baby killing. You are a disgusting, moralist, socialist communist because you allow a woman to choose. Meanwhile, we have absolutely no problem with seeing 9 million children. And then I actually didn't even hit on Medicaid, right? Medicaid, which provides resources for some of the most vulnerable people in our society, not just young people, but young people with debilitating diseases and born with complications that need funding from Medicaid in order to actually live. And I'm sure there's some in the CHIP program that would not live if they do not have this health care. I absolutely believe that. But I know that for a matter of fact. But in Medicaid, the funding that comes from Medicaid actually supports some of the most vulnerable and medically fragile children, people in general, right? But they don't give a damn about the elderly. But children, medically fragile children who, as soon as that funding cuts, they lose access to vital medical supplies and resources, and they will literally die. But we're morally bereft because we think a woman should be able to decide whatever she wants to do with her body. Let's read some more comments. They didn't even give an alternative option for those who benefit from CHIP. It's just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's from Dangerous You're Not on Twitter. I'm sorry, on YouTube. Ronald Finkley. Evan. We only have one chance as it seems to restore life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by, so this is what he says. We only have one chance, as I see it, to restore life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by flipping Congress this year. I think it's critically important that we flip Congress this year, without a shadow of a doubt. I think all hands on deck. Someone in the comment section on our afternoon show said that we had, they listed the number of days we had. All the seats, 435 seats in the House of Representatives, they're up. 33 seats in the U.S. Senate, they're up. All hands on deck to flip that. I do not think that once we flip it that we are done. We're just beginning. And once we flip it, it will stave off any other legislation that could, eviscerate our lives as we know it. So it's absolutely fundamentally essential that we, all hands on deck, make sure that we get a divided government. The most dangerous thing right now is to have a Republican White House, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate. We absolutely have to change that. But our work will have just begun, right? There's going to be a lot of work that we have to do after that. So we can't look at that as the end point. We have to look at that as the beginning point. Let's get a couple more comments. Let me jump over to Facebook. Facebook was talking about Brandon Jackson. Republicans hold the House and the Senate elections have consequences, people. This is why you don't protest vote when so much is on the line. I agree. Absolutely agree. And this is something that I've said on my show. Quite a few people get upset when I say this, but there has always been a lesser evil. And does it suck that American politics conforms to here's one choice, here's a worse choice? Yes, it does. Our party system, our electoral system is shaped up so that only two parties will have power in the United States. Does that always have to be the case? No, but in this last election, it most certainly was the case, right? And so these are the consequences of the election, right? So let's go down the list. Let's just for a minute, let's go down the list so that we can dispel with this beautiful talking point. It sounds good. It makes a great tweet to say, don't vote for the lesser evil, vote for the greater good. It sounds good, and it's beautiful, 140 characters, back when we had 140 characters on Twitter. But let's go down the list, right? So with this last piece of legislation, this tax bill, forget about the deficits. I don't really care about the $1.5 trillion deficits, because deficits don't really matter as much as all the things that had to be gutted to make this possible, right? So now one of the main things in there is the repeal to the individual mandate, which is going to potentially collapse Obamacare. So all the people who got Obamacare, people who signed up, because I signed up, we are potentially going to lose our coverage, right? Then you go to the situation with the Muslim ban, even though we've staved that off pretty much because of the courts. But this is the energy has to be placed there because of a constant onslaught of the Donald Trump administration. Look at all the federal judges that are being appointed, that are being shoved down the throats of the United States. Conservative extremists that are being appointed up and down the docket, all the way through the federal justice system. The judicial system, rather. Consider what's happening with the Dreamers. Consider what's happening with, just issue after issue after issue. Consider how he's carrying himself with regard to North Korea. Look at what he's talking about doing in Iran. He's getting ready, even if he doesn't intervene in Iran, he's doing everything he can to undermine the nuclear. He pulled us out of the Paris Accords. Tax breaks for the richest in the country. Permanent tax breaks for corporations. All while gutting every single program imaginable. And now they're talking about going after Social Security. Now they're talking about block granting Medicare. Now they're talking about all of these things that have dire consequences for millions and millions and millions of Americans. I think there's a paper out by Matt Brunig that shows the 160 of the wealthiest people in America own $2 trillion of wealth, while the rest of us, and this is after the tax break now, right? I believe he calculated in the tax break. I haven't finished reading the paper. The rest of us are living hand to mouth, check to check. Elections have real consequences, and I can guarantee you this: the majority of the things that I just listed, I would say 9 out of 10 things that I just listed would not have happened underneath the Hillary Clinton administration. I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton would get just as involved in Iran as Donald Trump wants to get involved. I'm not going to even pretend. I'm not even going to pretend there. But the majority of the things that I just listed, 9 out of 10 of the things that I just listed would not have happened underneath the Democratic administration. And back to the comment on YouTube that said that all we need to do is flip. This is the reason I don't think that that's the solution. That's the beginning point. I don't think that's the end point. I think that's the beginning point. Yes, we do need to flip the Congress in 2018. No questions asked. We'll talk about everything later. But the aside to that is that we have to hold every single one of our elected officials accountable. We have to hold them accountable, hold their feet to the fire. They're going to get uncomfortable. They're going to try to deflect and say, what about Trump? Yeah, Trump is there. We're going to address Trump. We're going to every single issue we're going to fight. That's why we elected you, right? But it doesn't stop there, because there's so many issues that are pervasive in the United States that when we flip in 2018, that cannot be the end point. That has to be the beginning point. All right, folks, that is all the time I have for today. I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Let's see if I can do this right. Am I doing this right? DDR2.
The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon!
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.